Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, I'm bringing you 3 deeply disturbing stories about rainy nights, those dark, isolated hours when the sound of rainfall masks other sounds, when visibility drops to almost nothing, when we're cut off from the world by walls of water and darkness. These aren't stories about people getting caught in bad weather or dealing with flooding. These are real experiences from real people who discovered that rain creates the perfect conditions for danger. It obscures vision, drowns out sounds, keeps people inside and unaware, and gives cover to those who wait in the darkness for opportunities. Before we dive in, I want to know, have you ever been alone during a heavy rainstorm and felt genuinely unsafe? Have you heard something during a downpour that you couldn't explain away as just the rain? Drop a comment and share your experience. Because what you're about to hear will make you realize that sometimes the most dangerous encounters happen when we're isolated by weather, when help feels impossibly far away, when the rain washes away evidence as fast as it falls. What separates safety from terror on a rainy night is sometimes just a locked door, just awareness, just the terrible luck of being in the wrong place when someone with bad intentions is watching. Alright, let's begin. And remember, every word of these stories is true. Story 1, The Intruder's Footsteps. This happened when I was really young. I'm talking 2nd or 3rd grade, so maybe 7 or 8 years old. It's hard for me to remember things clearly from that long ago, but this particular memory stands out with crystal clarity for reasons you'll soon understand. It was a school day, and it had been raining cats and dogs since morning. Not just regular rain, but one of those relentless downpours where the sky just opens up and doesn't stop for hours. After picking me up from school that afternoon, my parents got ready to leave for some kind of upscale event. I can't remember exactly what it was, maybe a fundraiser for my dad's work, or a dinner party for one of their friends, or possibly some kind of charity gala. The point is, they were dressed up really nice and planning to be out for several hours. They'd originally intended to come back home that night after the event ended. The plan was for them to be gone maybe 4 or 5 hours total, and they'd arranged for our neighbor Mrs. Patterson to check on me around dinner time. But while they were at the event, the storm picked up dramatically. What had been heavy rain turned into something much worse: flash flood warnings, roads closing due to standing water, trees coming down across streets. It became genuinely unsafe to drive any significant distance, especially in the dark with that much rain reducing visibility to almost nothing. So instead of driving back home, which would have required about 4 to 5 minutes on dark, winding roads in terrible conditions, my parents reluctantly decided to spend the night at their friend Barbara's house, which was much closer to the venue where the event was being held. I remember them calling me on the house phone around 9 p.m. My mom sounded really worried and apologetic, explaining the situation multiple times like I might not understand. But honestly, I kept insisting I was fine. I wasn't even hungry. I'd made myself a peanut butter sandwich for dinner like they told me to, and I'd be perfectly okay on my own for one night. At that age, I didn't fully grasp why they were making such a big deal about everything. I wasn't quite old enough to understand how serious it was to leave a 7-year-old home alone overnight, or how worried they must have been about my safety. In fact, I was actually kind of excited about having the whole place to myself. In my young mind, this meant I could eat unlimited candy from the pantry and there was no enforced bedtime. This was going to be amazing. My mom gave me a very specific list of things to do before bed, and she made me repeat them back to her twice to make sure I understood. Lock all the doors, front door, back door, and the side door to the garage. Check every window in the house to make sure they're closed and locked. Keep at least one light on downstairs all night. Make sure all the blinds and curtains were closed so nobody could see inside. At the time, I thought she was being overly paranoid. These all seemed like pretty typical safety measures that didn't really need to be emphasized so heavily. I didn't understand yet how vulnerable a house with a single small child inside really is, or why it's so important to make sure nobody driving or walking past can tell that the adults are gone. But I promised my mom I'd do everything on the list, and she seemed satisfied enough with that promise to hang up and let me go to bed whenever I wanted. I obviously didn't have a TV in my bedroom. This was before kids routinely had screens in their rooms, so I stayed downstairs in the living room watching cartoons on the couch. I told myself I'd do all the door locking and window checking stuff my mom had requested right before going to sleep. Since I was planning on staying up all night anyway, or at least as long as my body would let me, there was no rush to do it immediately. I grabbed a bunch of candy from the Halloween stash my parents kept hidden in the pantry, sprawled out on the couch with a blanket, and settled in to watch as much TV as my little body could handle. But predictably, at some point later in the night, the inevitable sugar crash hit me hard and I accidentally fell asleep right there on the couch. No surprise there, really. I was 7 years old. There was no way I was actually staying up all night no matter how much I'd convinced myself otherwise. I don't remember exactly what time I ended up waking up, but it was late enough that the TV had gone into sleep mode, that blue screen with the message about no signal that old cable boxes used to show after a few hours of inactivity. So I'd been asleep for at least 3 hours, probably more. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was how much colder it was. I remember being confused about why I was shivering even though I had a blanket over me. Nothing too unusual about that on its own. Temperatures do drop significantly at night, especially during rainstorms when cloud cover traps cold air near the ground. But the temperature difference was significant enough that even my 7-year-old brain instantly made the connection that something felt wrong about how cold it had gotten. I thought about just pulling the blanket tighter and going back to sleep right there on the couch. But then I remembered the list my mom had given me, and even at that young age, I knew she'd somehow find out if I didn't follow through. Mothers have this uncanny ability to know when their kids haven't done what they were told, even from a distance. Some kind of parental sixth sense. And I really didn't want to get in trouble after she'd trusted me enough to stay home alone. This was a big responsibility she'd given me, and I wanted to prove I could handle it. So I forced myself off the couch, still wrapped in the blanket because it was genuinely cold, and started going around the house doing everything she'd asked. I locked the front door first, turned the deadbolt and made sure it was secure. Then the back door, same thing. Then the side door that led to the garage. I went around closing all the blinds and curtains in the living room, the dining room, the kitchen. Made sure the light in the hallway was on like she'd requested. Then I started checking windows. Living room windows, both locked. Dining room window, locked. Kitchen window above the sink, locked. Everything was shut tight and secure, which confused me a little bit because the house still felt way colder than it should have even with all the windows and doors closed and locked. I even put my hand against a couple of the windows to see if I could feel a draft, like maybe one was cracked open just slightly and I couldn't see it in the dark. But they were all completely sealed. No gaps, no cracks, no source for cold air that I could identify. I figured maybe the storm had knocked out the heater or something. Or maybe there was an issue with our furnace that had caused it to stop working during the night. That explanation made sense to my young mind, and I was honestly so tired that I didn't have the energy to investigate further or think about it more deeply. So I headed upstairs to my bedroom, ready to crawl into my actual bed and forget about the weird temperature situation. Tomorrow I'd tell my parents about it and they could figure it out. When I got to my room and climbed into bed, I finally realized just how intense the storm had actually gotten while I'd been asleep downstairs. Our living room is tucked into the center of the house with no exterior walls, so down there I'd been mostly insulated from the sounds of the weather. But my childhood bedroom had a large window on an external wall, so suddenly I could hear everything. The rain was absolutely slamming against the glass like it was actively trying to break through and get inside. Like the storm itself was angry and attacking the house. And every minute or so, there'd be a brilliant flash of lightning that would briefly illuminate my entire room in stark white light, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder that was so loud I could feel it vibrating in my chest. I wasn't generally scared of storms at that age. I'd always thought thunder and lightning were kind of cool actually, but I do remember being genuinely concerned that a tree might fall on the house. We had several huge old trees in our yard, and I'd heard adults talking before about how dangerous they could be in severe weather. That's probably why I had trouble falling back asleep even though I'd been completely exhausted just 20 minutes earlier. My mind was racing with worry about trees crashing through the roof. As I lay there in bed, eyes closed, trying to force myself to relax and drift off, I started picking up on these odd sounds underneath the noise of the storm. Every so often, there were these faint creaking noises. Like the sound of weight on wood. Like footsteps on floorboards. The thing is, my entire bedroom floor was carpeted. Thick carpet that my feet sank into when I walked on it. So the sounds definitely weren't coming from my room. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just a tree swaying in the wind outside. Trees make all sorts of creaking and groaning noises when they move. But even at that young age, I'd lived in that house my whole life. I knew the general sounds associated with thunderstorms, knew what our house sounded like during bad weather. This definitely wasn't a normal storm sound. The creaking continued intermittently, and it started really bothering me after a while. It wasn't the storm keeping me awake anymore. It was that weird, unexplained creaking sound that didn't fit any pattern I recognized. I couldn't take it any longer. So I sat up in bed and looked around my dark room, not really sure what I was looking for or expecting to see. I listened carefully, trying to tune out the sounds of rain and thunder and focus in on just the creaking. Lightning flashed suddenly, illuminating my entire room for a split second in brilliant white light. Everything looked normal in that brief moment. My desk, my bookshelf, my toy box, my closet door. Wait. My closet door. The room went dark again and I sat there perfectly still, my heart starting to beat faster. About a minute later, lightning flashed again and my room was once more lit up for just that brief instant. And in that instant, I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat and my whole body go rigid with fear. The closet door was open. Not wide open, but definitely ajar, maybe 3 or 4 inches of gap between the door and the frame. It had been closed before. I was absolutely, 100% certain of it. I always kept my closet door closed at night because I'd gone through a phase where I was afraid of monsters hiding in there. My parents had helped me get over that fear by checking the closet every night before bed, and part of our routine was closing the door firmly afterward. Something had opened it while I was lying in my bed. There was something in my room with me. I didn't scream. I didn't speak. I didn't even consciously think about what to do. Pure survival instinct took over and I just got out of bed as quietly as I could, moving slowly and carefully so the bed wouldn't creak, and walked toward my bedroom door. That walk from my bed to the hallway felt like it took hours even though it was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. Like time had slowed down to a crawl. Every step felt impossibly loud despite the carpet. Every breath sounded like thunder in my ears. I was certain that at any moment, something would burst out of that closet and grab me. That I wouldn't make it to the door in time. But somehow I made it out into the hallway. I immediately headed downstairs, moving as quickly as I could while trying to stay quiet. I went straight to the dining room and crawled under the big wooden table we used for family dinners, pushing myself into the corner where the table met the wall. And then, only then, safe in my hiding spot, did I allow myself to start crying. Silent tears at first, then gradually building to full sobbing as the reality of the situation crashed over me. There was someone in my house. Someone had been hiding in my closet, watching me sleep. And my parents were too far away to help me. I'm not sure how long I stayed hidden under that table. Could have been 20 minutes, could have been an hour. Time lost all meaning. At some point during my crying, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy footsteps descending from the second floor. I held my breath instantly, every muscle in my body going tense, knowing that any sound I made could reveal my hiding spot and potentially end my life. And these weren't normal footsteps. They sounded wrong, chaotic and uneven, like whoever was making them was jumping and bouncing and pinballing down the stairs rather than walking normally. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and started moving across the first floor, getting closer to the dining room. Moving in my direction like they had a purpose, like they knew exactly where I was hiding. I can't adequately describe how terrified I was in that moment. My 7-year-old brain was absolutely convinced I was going to die. That this person was going to find me under this table and hurt me. And then I saw them. From my position under the table, I couldn't see their upper body. But I could see their feet and lower legs as they walked into the dining room. 2 bare feet stepped into view maybe 6 feet from where I was hiding. Followed by 2 legs that made my stomach turn. They were nasty. Absolutely disgusting. Wet and covered in mud that had this weird yellowish tint to it. I couldn't tell if these were male legs or female legs, that's how gross and almost disfigured they looked. There were cuts all over them, dozens of small scratches and a few deeper gashes. Like this person had run through a thorn bush or crawled through barbed wire or rolled around in broken glass. And they were stumbling as they walked, their legs wobbling and bending at odd angles. Like they were struggling to even stand upright, like they were injured or drunk or something worse. I watched those horrible feet shuffle closer to the table, and I was certain they were going to find me. But then something clattered to the floor right next to the table. A wrench. A large metal wrench, the kind my dad kept in the garage for working on pipes. It hit the hardwood floor with a loud metallic clang that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet house. I'm telling you, it took absolutely every fiber of my being, every ounce of self-control I possessed, to fight back the scream that was building in my throat. Because if this person bent down to pick up that wrench, if they crouched down even slightly, they would definitely see me hiding under this table. With eyes so wide they hurt, I watched as those disgusting feet just stood there. Not bending down to retrieve the wrench. Not walking away either. Just standing perfectly still maybe 4 feet from my face. It felt like a standoff. Like we were both frozen, both waiting to see what the other would do. Any wrong move from me could end my life right there. I don't know how long we stayed like that. 30 seconds? A minute? 5 minutes? Impossible to say. Eventually, finally, those feet started moving again, stepping over the wrench and continuing through the dining room without picking it up. I couldn't see them anymore once they left the dining room, but I could hear those chaotic, stumbling footsteps moving around the first floor. Into the kitchen. Then the living room. Then back to the front hallway. The sounds continued for what felt like an eternity. Just random, aimless movement through my house. Like this person was searching for something but didn't know where to look. And then, finally, I heard the front door open. A gust of wind and rain rushed into the house. I could hear it even from the dining room, could feel a cold breeze sweep through. Then the door shut again with a solid thunk. They were gone. The intruder had left. But I stayed hidden under that table for a long time after the door closed. Part of it was fear that they might come back, that this was some kind of trick. But another part of it was just complete psychological shutdown. What I can only describe now as shock or trauma. I was at that difficult age where I understood how dangerous the situation had been. I knew that person could have hurt me or killed me, but I wasn't old enough to know how to process or deal with that knowledge. The rest of that night is kind of a blur in my memory. I know at some point I came out from under the table. I remember picking up the wrench from the floor, didn't want my parents to find it and ask questions I didn't want to answer. I remember hiding it in the back of the hall closet under some old coats. The next morning, after I'd made absolutely sure the front door was locked again, I crept back upstairs, crawled into my bed, and finally fell asleep from pure exhaustion. When my parents came home around lunchtime the next day, everything seemed normal to them. They never knew anything had happened. I didn't tell them about the intruder. Not that day, not that week, not for several years actually. I was terrified they'd find out I hadn't immediately locked all the doors like they'd asked me to. That I'd fallen asleep on the couch instead of doing my chores right away. I was convinced they'd be angry with me, that I'd get in huge trouble for not following their instructions, that this was somehow my fault for being careless. So I just kept the whole terrifying experience to myself, buried it deep down where I didn't have to think about it. It wasn't until I was about 15 years old that I finally told them the story. We were talking about home security for some reason, maybe because of a news report about break-ins in our area, and it all just came spilling out. They were horrified, of course. My mom actually cried. My dad looked like he wanted to throw up. They felt incredibly guilty for leaving me alone that night, even though the circumstances had been beyond their control and they'd had no way of knowing something like that would happen. But by that point, it was nearly 8 years after the incident. The trail was impossibly cold. There was nothing that could be done, no police investigation that could be launched, no security footage to review, no evidence to collect. Looking back as an adult, I can piece together what probably happened. Someone driving past our house that rainy night noticed that all the interior lights were on but no adult vehicles were in the driveway. They realized the child was home alone. They waited until late, until they assumed I'd be asleep, and then checked doors and windows until they found one I'd forgotten to lock. Most likely the back door, since that's the one I did last and I was very tired by that point. I might have thought I locked it when I actually didn't turn the deadbolt all the way. They came inside, probably planning to burglarize the house while I slept upstairs. But then they decided to check the bedrooms first, maybe looking for jewelry or valuables. That's when they found me, saw me sleeping in my bed, and decided to hide in my closet instead of leaving immediately. I don't know what they were planning to do. I don't want to think about what might have happened if I hadn't woken up when I did, if I hadn't noticed the closet door opening. All I know is that this experience fundamentally traumatized me for the rest of my childhood and honestly into my adult life. I slept with a nightlight from that point on, well into my teenage years. I developed a serious fear of the dark that took years of therapy to overcome. I still have trouble with closet doors. I can't sleep if a closet door in my bedroom is even slightly open. It has to be completely closed or I'll lie awake all night staring at it. And I've become almost obsessive about home security as an adult. Every door gets locked immediately. Every window gets checked twice. I have multiple deadbolts and a security system. Because I learned the hard way that one small mistake, one unlocked door, one moment of carelessness, can be the difference between safety and disaster. Lock your doors at night, everyone. Every single one. Check them twice. It only takes one mistake. One oversight. And someone might be waiting for exactly that opportunity. Story 2, The Figure in the Rain. I'm an only child and I live with my mom and dad in a decently sized home in a quiet residential area. It's honestly a little big for just the three of us, 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, finished basement. But my parents' running joke is that it was never their intention to have only one kid. They just never got around to having more. I was 15 when this happened. It was a rainy Saturday night sometime in May. I can't remember the exact date, but I do remember it was during one of the last weekends before summer vacation started. Before I get into what happened, there's some important context about me personally that you need to understand. I have several weird medical conditions that make my life difficult in various ways. I get frequent panic attacks triggered by seemingly random things. I faint easily, especially in stressful situations or when my blood pressure drops. And I struggle with breathing issues at times, not quite asthma, but similar symptoms. I also have this really strange quirk that makes me different from most people. I need complete and total silence to fall asleep. And I mean complete silence. Even small background noises that most people wouldn't notice, like a fan running, or a clock ticking, or a refrigerator humming, are enough to keep me awake for hours. I've mostly learned strategies to deal with it over the years. I use earplugs sometimes. I play white noise that's specifically designed to block out other sounds. I've tried sleeping medications, though they don't work very well for me. But sleepovers at friends' houses are still unbearable. Vacations are a nightmare. Any situation where I can't control my sound environment makes sleep basically impossible. People always tell me they love the sound of rain, that it helps them fall asleep, that it's soothing and peaceful. But it does the exact opposite for me. Rain, especially heavy rain, creates this constant patter of sound that my brain just cannot tune out or ignore. It's like someone tapping on a drum right next to my head for hours on end. It doesn't rain often where I live. We're in a pretty arid region that gets maybe 20 or 30 days of precipitation per year. But every now and then we get these absolutely insane downpours that last all night and keep me staring at the ceiling until dawn. This particular Saturday night was one of those nights. It wasn't a full-on thunderstorm with lightning and booming thunder. Just constant, relentless, heavy rain that started around 9 p.m. and showed no signs of stopping. I tried everything I could think of to block it out. Earplugs, didn't work, could still hear it. White noise machine, just created more noise competing with the rain. Pillow over my head, made it hard to breathe, and I could still hear the rain drumming on the roof. It was sometime well after midnight, probably around 1 o'clock or 1:30 a.m., when I finally faced the reality that I wasn't going to get any sleep that night no matter what I tried. My usual strategy in situations like this is to get out of bed and do something physical to expend energy. If I can tire myself out enough, sometimes my body will overpower my brain's inability to ignore sounds. So I got up and started thinking about what I could do at 1:30 in the morning that would wear me out. Eventually, I decided to go for a walk in the rain. This might sound strange or unsafe, but it actually wasn't the first time I'd done this. Walking in the rain when I couldn't sleep was something my parents had actively encouraged me to do. We live in a very safe residential neighborhood, extremely low crime, good relationships with neighbors, the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked sometimes. Plus, there's a huge public park that directly borders our backyard. The park is really well maintained by the city, with paved walking paths, good lighting throughout, and regular police patrols. I'd walked through that park dozens of times late at night without any issues. It was actually one of my favorite places to clear my head. So I put on my rain jacket, this yellow waterproof thing that made me look like I worked on a fishing boat, and quietly walked downstairs, being careful not to wake my parents who were sleeping in their bedroom on the first floor. I stepped outside through the back door without even bothering to bring an umbrella. The whole point was to get wet, to feel the rain, to experience the weather directly rather than trying to hide from it. It was oddly peaceful outside despite the downpour. The streets were completely empty, not a single car driving past, not a person in sight. I've always been drawn to nature, to outdoor spaces, to the feeling of being small in something larger than myself. And seeing all the trees in our neighborhood gently swaying in the wind, with raindrops streaming down their branches and leaves, was exactly the kind of calming experience I needed. I walked through our backyard, through the gate in our fence that led directly into the park, and started following one of the main paved paths. After about 20 minutes of steady walking, I genuinely started to feel myself getting tired. That pleasant heaviness in my limbs that signals your body is ready for sleep. Perfect. This was working. I turned around and started heading back toward my house, figuring I'd be able to finally fall asleep once I got back to my bed. As I was cutting through the park on my return route, I happened to glance toward the street that ran along the park's eastern edge. And I saw something really strange. There was a long dark object lying flat in the middle of the road. Right in the center of the lane, impossible to miss if any car came driving past. At first, I genuinely thought it was just an oddly shaped garbage bag. Or maybe a tarp that had blown into the street during the storm. But the more I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing through the rain and darkness, the more I realized what it actually was. It was a person. A human being, lying face down in the middle of the street. I felt a sick, sinking feeling immediately bubble up in my stomach. My heart rate spiked and I could feel that familiar tightness in my chest that signaled a potential panic attack coming on. The only thought bouncing around my brain was the terrifying likelihood that this person had been hit by a car and was seriously injured or dead. There was no other logical explanation for why someone would be lying motionlessly in the street, especially while it was pouring rain. As much as every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, to keep my head down and walk away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, I felt like I had a moral obligation to do something. My parents had raised me with strong values about helping people in need. If someone is in danger, you help them. That's what good people do. That's what decent human beings do. So against my better judgment, against every warning signal my body was sending me, I started walking toward the street to check on this person. As I got closer, I was able to make out more details despite the rain and darkness. They were wearing dark pants, looked like maybe jeans or work pants, and a plaid shirt. Definitely not the type of clothing someone would wear during heavy rain. No rain jacket, no waterproof gear, nothing appropriate for the weather. Based on the build and clothing, I was pretty sure it was a man. But I couldn't see his face since he was lying face down. I was maybe 30 feet from the street when something really weird happened that I'll never forget. I suddenly became acutely aware, for the first time that entire night, of how genuinely cold I was. Like the rain had been lukewarm 1 second, cool but not uncomfortable, and then became ice cold the next second. Like the temperature had dropped 20 degrees in an instant. It didn't make meteorological sense. But I felt it clearly, undeniably. A bone-deep cold that made me shiver violently. I was about 20 feet from the person in the street, still approaching cautiously, when a sound erupted from somewhere behind me that made me freeze in place. It was a screech. Not human, definitely not human. But also not quite like any animal I'd ever heard before. Like a howl but slightly wrong, distorted. Like a wounded animal in terrible pain, or something trying to imitate an animal but not getting it quite right. Pure instinct took over and I whipped my head around, adrenaline flooding my system, my body going into immediate fight or flight mode. I scanned the tree line behind me, looking for whatever had made that horrible noise, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. But I couldn't see anything. Just dark trees and shadows and rain. The sound must have come from deeper in the park, from somewhere I couldn't see from my current position. Which meant there was no immediate danger to me, at least not from that direction. Still, the sheer strangeness of it, that awful, wrong-sounding screech, had my entire body on high alert. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, trying to calm my racing heart, trying to convince myself it was just a fox or a cat or some perfectly explainable wildlife. Then I turned back toward the street to refocus on the person who needed help. But when I looked at the street again, everything changed in an instant. The person wasn't lying down anymore. They were sitting perfectly upright in the middle of the road. Back straight, head turned directly toward me. Staring at me. In that moment, my vision started narrowing, that horrible tunnel vision feeling I get right before I faint. Everything around the edges started going gray and fuzzy. The only thing keeping me from passing out completely and collapsing right there was focusing on the sound of the rain. Thousands and thousands of raindrops pattering all around me, creating this constant white noise that I forced my brain to lock onto. Before I could fully process what was happening, before I could decide what to do, the person suddenly stood up. And they started sprinting directly toward me. Full sprint. Running as fast as they could. Closing the distance between us terrifyingly quickly. And on their face, even through the rain and darkness, I could see it clearly, was this huge, demonic smile. Too wide, showing too many teeth. Not a normal happy smile but something twisted and wrong. Worse than the smile, though, was what they were holding. In their right hand, raised up near their shoulder, was what looked unmistakably like a kitchen knife. The blade caught a glint of light from one of the park street lamps, and I saw it clearly for just a flash. 8 or 9 inches of steel. Up until that moment in my life, I genuinely did not know what it meant to fear for your life. To believe with absolute certainty that you're about to be murdered. But standing there in that park, watching a man with a knife sprint toward me with that horrible smile, I understood completely. I snapped out of my dizzy, faint-headed state instantly. Adrenaline has a way of overriding medical conditions when survival is on the line. I turned and ran as fast as I've ever run in my entire life, heading back toward the trees, toward the deeper parts of the park where I might be able to lose him. As soon as I started running, I heard him yell something behind me. His voice was loud and clear despite the rain, "I'll kill you." Just those 3 words, screamed at the top of his lungs. Not a threat, not a question. A promise. A statement of intent. The wet grass made it almost impossible to run at full speed. My feet kept slipping, my shoes couldn't get proper traction. Every step felt unstable, like I might fall at any moment. But my one saving grace, the single advantage I had, was that whoever was chasing me would have to deal with the exact same conditions. The slippery grass would slow him down too. I didn't want to lead this person back to my house, didn't want him to see where I lived or be able to find me later. So instead of heading home, I ran toward the densest part of the park. That's where the screech had come from, I know. But I didn't have another choice. Between a mysterious animal sound and a man with a knife actively chasing me, I'd take my chances with whatever was in the woods. I ran past the playground equipment, past the picnic shelters, toward the section of the park where the trees grew thick and close together. I didn't look back once. I was too scared of what I might see, too scared that looking back would slow me down even a fraction of a second. I just ran like my life literally depended on it. Because I was genuinely convinced it did. Considering how cracked out and insane that guy had looked, that demonic smile, those wild eyes, the way he moved, I absolutely believed he would kill me if he caught me. I made it into the wooded area and immediately felt a small sense of relief. Here there were trees I could hide behind, shadows I could disappear into, multiple directions I could run if he got too close. I kept running until my lungs were burning and my legs felt like they might give out. I was on the verge of throwing up from pure exhaustion and fear. Finally, when I thought I might actually collapse if I ran any further, I ducked behind a large tree trunk and tried to catch my breath as quietly as possible. I pressed my back against the rough bark and listened intently, trying to hear footsteps or movement or any indication of where my pursuer was. But all I could hear was rain. Just rain hitting leaves and branches and ground. No footsteps. No breathing. No sounds of someone moving through the undergrowth. I waited there, barely daring to breathe, for what felt like an eternity. Probably at least 20 minutes of just standing perfectly still behind that tree, listening, waiting. I had no idea if he was still chasing me or if he'd given up. No idea if he was close or far. No idea if it was safe to move or if I should stay hidden. Eventually, when my breathing had returned to something approaching normal and I felt confident I'd been still and silent long enough, I carefully peeked around the tree trunk. Nothing. No one visible in any direction. I still didn't feel comfortable moving yet, so I waited another 5 or 10 minutes just to be absolutely certain. Finally, when I was as sure as I could be that the immediate danger had passed, I stepped out from behind the tree and started making my way home through a different route. I took the absolute long way, went around the entire perimeter of the park, staying close to the fence line, moving through sections I rarely visited that were furthest from where I'd been chased. No one followed me. I checked constantly, looking over my shoulder every few seconds, but I was alone. It took probably 4 to 5 minutes to get home when it should have taken maybe 10. But I wasn't taking any chances, wasn't risking the direct route. When I finally made it back to my house and slipped in through the back door, which thankfully I'd left unlocked since I'd only planned to be gone a short time, I collapsed on my bed, completely drenched and basically traumatized. My clothes were soaked through. My shoes were caked with mud. My hair was plastered to my head. I was shivering uncontrollably from cold and fear and adrenaline crash. But I was alive. I'd survived. I never got answers for anything that happened that night. Never found out who that man was or why he'd been lying in the street or why he'd chased me. The screech is honestly what confuses and disturbs me the most when I think back on it. I have such a hard time believing it was somehow unrelated to the man with the knife, but it's just too coincidental otherwise. My best guess, the theory that makes the most sense to me, is that the man heard the screech too. He looked up from his position lying in the street, saw me standing there staring at him, and something in his brain just snapped. Maybe he was on drugs. Maybe he was having some kind of psychotic episode. Maybe he was always violent and was just looking for a target. As for his motivation for attacking me specifically, I genuinely have no idea. There's just crazy, dangerous people out there in the world, and sometimes you encounter them through pure bad luck. I still live in the same house today. I'm 20 years old now, and several years have gone by since that terrifying night. But it's hard not to think about that experience every time it rains at night. Every time I look out my window at that park. Every time I can't sleep and consider going for a late night walk. I haven't walked through that park alone at night since. I probably never will again. Because somewhere out there, maybe still in that same neighborhood, is a man who smiled at me with a demon's grin and promised to kill me. And I have no intention of ever giving him a second chance. Story 3, The Riverside Stalker. I'm 29 years old, and one of the only things that's ever really helped me clear my head and deal with stress is camping. But not the kind of camping most people think of when they hear that word. I'm not talking about campgrounds with designated sites and fire pits and other campers nearby. I'm not talking about national parks with rangers and visitor centers and marked trails. I'm talking about true middle-of-nowhere camping. Remote wilderness camping where you don't see another human being for days, where cell service is non-existent, where you're genuinely isolated from civilization. I grew up in Northern California, and I've spent the better part of my adult life learning to find those hidden, remote pockets where you can still feel like the only person left on Earth. Places that aren't marked on maps, that don't have names, that you can only reach by following barely their dirt roads to their absolute end. This story took place a few months ago. I'd just gone through a really difficult breakup with my girlfriend of 3 years. Let's just say I was going through it emotionally and mentally. I needed to be alone. Needed to get away from people, from my apartment, from the city, from everything that reminded me of the relationship that had just ended. So one Friday afternoon, I just threw some gear in my truck without any real plan and decided to drive out to a quiet riverside spot I'd stumbled across once before during a previous camping trip. It wasn't an official campsite or anything marked or designated. Just a little bend in the river you could reach if you followed this barely visible dirt road past miles of nothing. I'd been there once before, maybe a year earlier, and I'd had the entire area completely to myself. It was perfect, peaceful, isolated, exactly what I needed. I got there sometime in the late afternoon, probably around 4 o'clock or 5 p.m. The sun was still up but getting lower in the sky, creating that nice golden light through the trees. But the second I turned onto the narrow dirt path that led from the main road down to the river, my stomach sank a little with disappointment. There were already 2 pickup trucks parked near the trailhead. One gray, one white. Both looked like the kind of vehicles you'd expect to see in rural areas, older models, slightly beaten up, mud on the tires. I couldn't see anyone around the trucks or on the trail, but obviously there were other people out here. That immediately killed a lot of the appeal for me. I hadn't driven all this way out to the middle of nowhere just to have neighbors. I wanted solitude, isolation, complete separation from other humans. I sat in my truck for a moment, seriously debating whether I should just turn around and try to find a different spot. But I'd driven over 2 hours to get here. I was tired, I was emotionally drained, and I really didn't want to spend another hour or 2 searching for an alternative location. I convinced myself that it was probably a big enough stretch of river that whoever owned those trucks would be far enough away that I wouldn't even see or hear them. Rivers can be several miles long, and people spread out when they're camping or fishing. Chances were good I could find a spot far from whoever else was here. So I grabbed my gear from the truck bed and started hiking downriver, away from where the trucks were parked. I walked for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, following the riverbank, looking for a good spot to set up camp. That's when I saw them. 2 guys fishing up ahead, standing in the shallows where the water was calm. They looked exactly like what you'd expect from people fishing in a remote area. Thick beards, slightly overweight builds, heavy boots, flannel shirts. Probably in their 40s or 50s. But something seemed off about them immediately, even from a distance. They looked like they were focused on something other than fishing. One of them had his back to me and seemed to be doing something with his hands, fiddling with something I couldn't quite see. As I got closer, walking along the bank maybe 30 feet from where they were standing, one of them quickly covered something with his jacket. A fast, furtive movement that definitely looked suspicious. Then he turned and gave me this awkward, forced half smile. Not a friendly "hey, how's it going" smile. More like a "I got caught doing something I shouldn't be doing" smile. I nodded back politely but didn't slow down or stop to chat. Just kept walking at the same steady pace. As I passed them, the same guy who'd covered whatever it was called out to me. "Hey man, don't worry about it. We were just, doing some target practice. Shooting at cans. Didn't mean to spook you with the noise." Which was weird because I hadn't heard any gunshots. And I definitely didn't look spooked or concerned about anything. The whole interaction felt forced and strange, like he was trying too hard to explain something I hadn't asked about, trying to preemptively justify his presence there. I just gave him another brief nod without breaking stride, muttered "no worries" or something equally non-committal, and kept walking. But as I continued downriver, I couldn't help replaying that brief exchange in my head. It wasn't even what he'd said that bothered me. It was how rushed and awkward it had come out. Like he'd rehearsed an excuse but delivered it poorly. And why would he feel the need to explain what they were doing to a random stranger passing by? Most people in these remote areas just ignore each other, maybe exchange a brief nod, and move on. I got this uneasy feeling settling in my gut, that instinctive sense that something wasn't quite right even though I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. But I pushed the feeling down and tried to rationalize it away. Rural folks can be a little socially awkward when interacting with strangers. That's not unusual or inherently suspicious. These were probably just two guys enjoying a fishing trip who happened to be a bit odd in their social skills. Nothing to worry about. Nothing that should concern me. I kept telling myself that as I continued searching for a good camping spot. Eventually, I found a decent location maybe another quarter-mile downriver. A small clearing near the bank where the trees were thick enough to provide some privacy and the ground was relatively flat. It wasn't perfect, there was a patch of mud I'd have to work around, and the undergrowth was a bit dense, but it was tucked away enough that I felt like I had my own private space. The trail curved out of sight behind me, so I wouldn't be able to see those fishermen or anyone else who might be camping in the area. Which was exactly what I wanted. I set up my tent, organized my gear, and tried to settle in for what I hoped would be a peaceful evening alone with my thoughts. It had started raining lightly not long after I finished setting up camp, just a gentle drizzle, nothing heavy. Actually kind of nice and atmospheric. I threw on my rain jacket and sat on a fallen log near the river's edge with a book, trying to relax and let the sound of flowing water calm my mind. I was there for maybe an hour, reading and occasionally staring at the river, when I noticed movement across the water on the opposite bank. It was one of the guys from earlier. The same one who'd called out the awkward explanation. But this time he was alone, no sign of his fishing buddy. He spotted me almost immediately and waved. A big, exaggerated wave like we were old friends who hadn't seen each other in years. I hesitated for a second, then waved back. Seemed rude not to acknowledge him. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted across the river, "Hey, what's your name?" The river wasn't super wide at this point, maybe 40 or 50 feet across, so we could hear each other pretty clearly if we raised our voices. I don't know why I answered honestly. In hindsight, I should have lied or just ignored the question. But in the moment, it seemed like a harmless question from someone just trying to be friendly, and I didn't want to be unnecessarily antisocial or paranoid. "Anisha," I shouted back. He stood there for a second after I answered, not saying anything else. Just staring at me from across the water. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled something out. At first, I thought it might be a phone, which seemed odd since we were way too far from cell towers to have any service. But as I focused on what he was holding, I realized it looked more like a disposable camera. One of those cheap plastic ones you can buy at drugstores. Before I could even process what was happening or why he'd have something like that, he raised the camera up to his face. And he took a picture of me. Just pointed it directly at me and clicked. The flash went off, clearly visible even in the fading daylight, and I saw him lower the camera. Then, without saying another word, without any explanation or goodbye, he just turned around and started walking back up the riverbank in the direction he'd come from. Just like that. Photographed me and left. I stood there completely dumbfounded, trying to understand what had just happened and why. This went way beyond socially awkward rural behavior. This was genuinely creepy and invasive. Taking someone's picture without asking permission, especially after they just told you their name, felt predatory. Wrong. Threatening in a way I couldn't fully articulate but definitely felt in my gut. I walked back to my campsite feeling deeply unsettled and creeped out. The peaceful isolation I'd come here for suddenly felt less like a relaxing escape and more like dangerous vulnerability. I was alone out here. No cell service to call for help if I needed it. No other campers nearby that I knew of except for these two increasingly suspicious men. I seriously considered packing up and leaving right then. Just abandon the camping trip, get back in my truck, drive home. But I also didn't want to overreact to what might have been nothing more than an extremely socially inappropriate but ultimately harmless interaction. Plus, it was starting to get dark. Driving back on those narrow dirt roads in the rain and darkness seemed potentially more dangerous than just staying put. So I made the decision to stay but remain vigilant. I'd keep my ears open, stay alert, and if anything else weird happened I'd pack up immediately and leave regardless of how dark or rainy it was. After the sun went down completely, I crawled into my tent and tried to get some sleep. But my mind refused to shut off. I kept replaying everything, the awkward explanation from the fisherman, the weird photograph, the general strangeness of the whole situation. Plus, I couldn't stop thinking about my ex-girlfriend and the breakup. That's what I'd come out here to escape, but of course your thoughts follow you wherever you go. I don't know how long I lay there like that. At least an hour, probably closer to 2. Just lying in my sleeping bag, listening to the rain pattering on my tent and the river flowing nearby. At some point, though, I started hearing something else mixed in with those natural sounds. Faint, uneven sounds. Like someone stepping carefully over wet ground, trying to move quietly but not quite succeeding. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just an animal. Deer are common in this area. Raccoons, possums, all sorts of wildlife that moves around at night. But the longer I listened, the clearer it became that these weren't animal sounds. They were footsteps. Human footsteps. Circling around my campsite. The second I made that connection, the instant my brain categorized the sounds as definitely human, my stomach dropped and terror flooded through me. I didn't even have to wonder who it might be. I wasn't a fool. This was obviously one or both of those men from earlier. But I also wasn't helpless or unprepared. I never, ever go into remote wilderness alone without protection. Ever. It's a basic safety rule I learned early in my outdoor adventures. I reached for my handgun, a 9mm Glock that I keep in a quick access case next to my sleeping bag whenever I'm camping alone, and grabbed it with hands that were shaking slightly from adrenaline. I didn't hesitate or second-guess myself. I unzipped my tent as quietly as I could and stepped out into the rain. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but I needed to stay calm and in control. Panic would only make the situation more dangerous. I clicked on my high-powered flashlight and swept it across the trees surrounding my campsite. And there he was. That same creepy fisherman from earlier, standing maybe 20 yards away, partially hidden behind a tree trunk. He wasn't smiling anymore. Wasn't making friendly conversation. Just had this completely blank, empty expression on his face, like he wasn't fully present mentally. Like whatever was happening in his brain had nothing to do with normal human thought processes. The scariest part wasn't his vacant expression, though. It was the fact that he was holding a small axe in his left hand. One of those camping hatchets with a blade about 5 or 6 inches long. For a second or two, I genuinely couldn't move or speak. My brain was trying to process the reality of the situation, that I was alone in the woods with a man holding a weapon, that this could be the last few minutes of my life. But somehow, I managed to raise my gun and point it directly at him. I forced my voice to stay as calm and authoritative as possible, even though every part of me was screaming with fear. "Leave. Now. Or I will shoot you." His facial expression didn't change at all. It was like my words meant absolutely nothing to him, like they didn't even register. We stood there in this terrible standoff for several long seconds, me pointing a gun at him, him standing motionless with his axe, rain falling between us. Then he started talking. His voice was quiet and mumbly, hard to understand at first. He said something about how his friend Ivan had discouraged him from coming to find me tonight. That Ivan had told him it was a bad idea. Then, and this is the part that still makes my blood run cold, he said very matter-of-factly, I had to take care of Ivan first. The way he said it. The casual tone. The implication was unmistakable. He'd done something to his fishing buddy. Something terrible. And now he was here for me. I didn't wait for him to say anything else or to move closer or to give me any more information about what he'd done or what he planned to do. I fired a shot straight up into the trees above his head. The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the quiet forest, echoing off the trees and water. He stumbled backward slightly, clearly startled by the sound even though the bullet hadn't come near him. I immediately leveled the gun back at him, my hand steadier now, my voice more confident. "Drop the axe. Now. This is your last warning." This time, he actually listened. The axe fell from his hand and hit the wet ground with a soft thud. Huge wave of relief washed through me, but I knew I wasn't out of danger yet. He could still have other weapons. He could still charge at me. "Take off your shoes," I commanded. I wanted to slow him down, make it harder for him to follow me when I left. He bent down and unlaced his boots, pulled them off, dropped them on the ground. "Any other weapons on you? Empty your pockets." Slowly. He reached into his jacket pockets and pants pockets, pulling out a pocket knife and what looked like a multi-tool. Dropped them both on the ground next to his boots. "Now go to my tent. Get my gear. All of it. Bring it out here where I can see it." I watched him like a hawk as he shuffled over to my tent, moving awkwardly in his socked feet, and started pulling out my sleeping bag, my backpack, my camp stove. He tossed everything out into the clearing where I could see it, where I could keep both him and my belongings in my line of sight simultaneously. I grabbed the most essential items as quickly as I could, my backpack with food and water, my sleeping bag, my extra ammunition. I'd have to leave the tent behind, but that was a small price to pay for staying alive. I reached down and grabbed his axe from where he'd dropped it, shoved it into my backpack. Didn't want him retrieving it after I left. Then I grabbed his boots and threw them as hard as I could into the darkness, hearing them splash somewhere in the river or the underbrush. "Walk that way," I ordered, gesturing with the gun toward the opposite direction from my truck. "And don't stop until you can't see my flashlight anymore." He started walking slowly, painfully slowly, barefoot over the rough ground. I kept my light and my gun trained on him the entire time, watching until he was completely out of sight, swallowed by darkness and distance. The moment I couldn't see him anymore, I turned and started moving quickly back toward the trailhead, back toward my truck. That hike through the pitch-black forest in the pouring rain, stumbling over roots and rocks, trying to move quietly but also quickly, constantly checking over my shoulder to make sure he wasn't following, was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. I wasn't sure if he was behind me. Wasn't sure if he was following despite the distance I'd put between us. My imagination kept conjuring images of him sprinting barefoot through the forest to catch up, to attack me from behind. Both pickup trucks were still parked at the trailhead when I finally emerged from the woods. I didn't stop to think about what that might mean, whether the other guy, Ivan, was really dead or just incapacitated somewhere. I just threw all my gear into the truck bed, jumped into the driver's seat, and drove out of there as fast as the narrow dirt road would allow. When I finally got back to an area with cell service, probably 4 to 5 minutes of driving later, I immediately called the police. I reported everything that had happened, described the location as precisely as I could using landmarks and road names. The dispatcher took all my information and said they'd send officers out to investigate the area. A few months have passed since that night, and I honestly don't know if anything ever came of my police report. I never followed up, never called to ask what they'd found. Part of me doesn't want to know. Doesn't want confirmation of what I suspect happened to that guy named Ivan. What still haunts me most about the whole encounter is that comment the creepy fisherman made, "I had to take care of Ivan first." I really don't want to think too hard about what that means. But there are only so many interpretations, and none of them are good. Did he kill his fishing buddy before coming to my campsite? Is there a body somewhere along that river? Did Ivan try to stop him and pay the ultimate price for it? These questions circle through my mind sometimes late at night when I can't sleep. I'm just grateful, so incredibly grateful, that I was armed that night. That I had the means to defend myself. I could have very easily lost my life if I hadn't been carrying that gun. If I'd been just another unprepared camper relying on luck and hoping for the best. I still go camping. Still seek out those remote, isolated spots where you can feel truly alone with nature. But I'm more careful now. More selective about locations. More aware of my surroundings. And I never, ever forget to bring adequate protection. Because sometimes, in the most beautiful and peaceful places, you encounter the absolute worst that humanity has to offer. And you need to be ready. 3 people. 3 rainy nights. 3 encounters where weather created the perfect cover for danger, where isolation became vulnerability, where the sound of rainfall masked approaching threats. I want to thank everyone who shared their experiences. Rain is beautiful and necessary, but it also creates conditions that danger exploits: reduced visibility, muffled sounds, people staying inside and unaware. If you found these stories compelling, please like and subscribe. And if you've had your own terrifying experience on a rainy night, something that made you realize how truly alone and vulnerable you were, share it in the comments. These stories need to be told and believed. Stay safe out there. Lock your doors and windows, especially during storms. Stay aware of your surroundings even in familiar places. Don't go out alone late at night if you can avoid it. And remember, sometimes the rain is hiding something much more dangerous than just weather. Until next time.